It is time for Village in Motion, and of course, being the last Friday of the month, we have Jane Curtis here with us. And our topic this morning is lost cities. Now, what do you know about lost cities? Jane's going to tell us all about them. Jane?
The first thing I'm going to do is mention that this is the 9th anniversary of our program.
Really?
Exploring history. The last one in August of 2009, it all began. And we've been traveling around ever since to various different
Very good.
places and talking about different people and different things. And as you say, we do have an interesting one. Just the title is kind of fascinating.
Yes, it is.
Lost Cities.
Yes.
I first decided this would be a good topic for us when I was rereading one of the classic old British mysteries, and they referred to somebody flying over the wastes of Arabia and seeing the remnants of an ancient city, the city of, they called it Wabar. And I thought, well, is there such a thing, or did they make this up? And I looked it up, and this was some years back, and I thought this is a wonderful subject. It also was called Ubar and other things, and there was another for it, Elam or Iram. So it's interesting.
And of course, it's always Atlantis.
Well, and there's always Atlantis. We're going to talk about some of the ones, well-known ones, and a couple of ones maybe that are less so. But this city of Ubar is one, if it is or was, it was located in the lower quadrant of the Arabian Peninsula. And may we please see a first picture worth 1,000 words. No, that's not the first one. That's some of the terrain that we're going to have to cope with. Go backward if you can. No, try going forward, because if you picture the Arabian Peninsula, it's a kind of a squarish, rectangle-ish thing, and down at the bottom there, there's an area known as the empty quadrant, and it's just solid sand dunes like that picture. We'll run through these pictures again maybe. Over on the eastern end of it is Oman, and Oman goes around, that's the Persian Gulf up there in the left corner, and then the thing that sticks up, points over there into Persia. So this isn't actually in Arabia, but the Oman and the Arab states, United Arab Federation, what it is they call it down there, is the area. Let's try another picture amongst those first 5 pictures. Oh no, you're going the wrong way. Please go backward, and we will.
Having trouble with our pictures this morning.
Yeah, because it should be. Now, this is a sample of the terrain, and you really can't imagine an awful lot of building cities.
Looks like it would be an easy terrain to be lost in.
A very easy terrain to be lost in, and a very easy terrain to be altered by the wind blowing around. So if we can look back a little bit again, we will see this is taken to be the remains of a fortress. And if we can see, let's go back, please, backward to the beginning, the very beginning of the pictures, number 1. And that will show us the Arabian Peninsula. Well, we'll just have to do without it, I guess, at the moment. But the backward, reverse, because that will give you the picture of what we have to cope with here. Now, the Arabian Peninsula, there were 2 meteorite episodes with that. It was struck by meteorites. And one was kind of in the middle of the peninsula part way up, and the other one was right down in this very area. So people think, well, maybe this is just something from that, and who knows about it. Well, it's referred to in the Quran. It has several different names, this alleged city, but it is referred to, and the king was, at first he was all right, he was good, but then he displeased the gods, and this was before the days the Muslims came along. Displeased the gods, and the gods destroyed the city. That was gone. And then in the Quran it talks about how their gods punished King Ad of this land. So this, of course, excited everybody's interest. But for a long time, nobody did anything. And in the 1930s, there were a couple of expeditions planned out there. A terribly hard area. There's only one known large main oasis there, water source for them. But in around 1930, they had an expedition looking for this, the rumors of this, and they didn't really find it. This was a man named Bertram Thomas, and he thought, well, he marked it on his map. This is a road that he had Bedouin guides, a team of Bedouins helping through doing all this, his team, and he wrote it down on his map. And later on, he told T.E. Lawrence about it, famous explorer. And T.E. Lawrence thought, this sounds very interesting. But he said, look, he didn't actually go. But he thought, well, this could be something good for aviation, which was developing at that time. And they wanted, well, to make a longer story short, it was in 1944 when...
Oh, we lost the mic.
In 1944, when the war was going on, the RAF had a flight that was right on that tip of the peninsula there from Oman up to the Arab states, and was blown off course, lost his bearings, and thought he saw a town below, went down and just saw ruins. So he didn't land, and he finally got back on the track, but he told them about it when he got back, how exciting this was. And one man was bitten by the bug, and he got up an expedition and went down. And each one of these people found some sort of evidence that might be okay for really ruins of a real place. It actually was. But nobody could actually prove it beyond any doubt. So it stayed something of a mystery. The next one I wanted to talk about was perhaps the one that you have mentioned here, which was Atlantis. And now Atlantis, nobody's ever proved pro or con there. But Atlantis, of course, the rumor got started from Plato, and Plato's source of information was very, very interesting. In fact, I want to make sure I don't leave anybody out. Plato was writing up a conference that had been held with various famous Greeks of the day. And according to Plato, now he was describing what one of the speakers had said at this thing. The speaker was Critias, and he was reporting what he had been told by his grandfather. His grandfather's source was Solon, one of the Greek smart people of the day, scholar or whatnot, and he had been to Egypt and heard it from Egyptians. He heard stories. Oh, okay. Now, with this train of sourcing, you would sort of wonder how much of it was true. Now, if we could see, and there was a picture, it's actually the, I think probably the sixth and seventh pictures, if you can tell by that, from the beginning one, go down a little bit. We had it up for a moment there, it had these circles. That's one of them. Yeah, those two, that's very good. That one is a diagram of how Plato described the city of Atlantis. And he said it was these bands of land separated by bands of water, and then on one side there's a channel leading out. And the next picture will show us more of an artist's conception, but you see you had then some land beyond it. And that was the key part of the city there, and it channels out to the ocean. Some people said, oh, that was nothing but Plato describing the ideal city, that he wasn't driving anything real. And so these people had talked about, these wise folks. Others said, no, he's describing a real thing. And then they tried to link it up with Santorini and with some things in the Atlantic Ocean, which really don't gel for it. So there was a lot of talk about it, and apparently not all that much. Now, what's another famous one we've heard about is Troy.
Troy, yes.
And for a long, long time, they said Troy is simply a figment of imagination. It was just these people writing exciting literature, you know, like the action movies today.
Right.
There was lots of action going on. But then Heinrich Schliemann was the one who really discovered it. And this is the kind of thing you really like, because it's a hidden, completely hidden thing. There were no ruins in sight at the time. And he figured out, he read Homer and reread Homer. He's a real scholar of Greek. And he said, this is where it should be, based on what it said in the story and the action in the story. And again, to make a long story, interesting story short, Heinrich Schliemann said, well, we will dig here, and he got permission. It's in what's now Turkey. And this was in the 1800s that Schliemann was active. And sure enough, he began to find things, artifacts and, you know, lovely items. Walls, things obvious, human constructions. And when he found Troy, it was Troy, of course, he had found it. And it existed on several levels. And each level had been destroyed by one thing or another, you know, fire or military action. Well, down there on level 7, he identified it with actual Troy. And this was one, of course, it's common knowledge now, that's where Troy was. And all the things he brought out, pure gold objects that are described by Homer, you know, pins and things. So it was a very, very exciting one, and one that really, really panned out. We have others. Let's see, I think we should perhaps go to, come over to our hemisphere and see things over here. Well, let's not go yet. Let's go up to Scotland, to the Orkney Islands, to a place called Scala. Let me see now, that should be, I'll try to keep in line with the pictures here. Oh, it's the wrong side.
I think you have it upside down.
We got all turned around here with. Can't find it. Well, all right. Pictures. Would you picture A? Just go on to the next picture. That's good. I think we'll just do that, say next each time, and that will work. This is the fields looking down from where Troy was. And you will see that some excavation has been taking place. And these stone walls, just typical, I guess, for that period. And as they dug down and down, they had all kinds of problems. Local permits, they were supposed to give back half of everything they found. And they cheated a little bit on that. But by the time they had spent a year or so doing it, they had really solved it. The next picture will show us part of Pompeii. There's another one you've heard of.
Yes.
Pompeii, those things in the middle are not for modern tourists, so that you won't drive down there. The things are for people to walk on, because these troughs would have water in them. And you'd have to take a fairly big step.
Yes, you would.
But this was in 79 AD. Now, Silvius had erupted before that many times, but nothing as bad as this one. The statistics were that 150 tons of ash were coming out of there per second.
Oh, wow.
And that means they're upwards of 20 feet deep of ash and pumice. The next picture shows us that it was a good-sized little town there, Pompeii. It was a regular city, seaside city, important one. And you can see it was just quite modern looking. There's a sort of porch there on the left.
Right.
And drainage. The street was paved.
Sidewalks.
Sidewalks. And you can see the length of it. Faintly in the distance there is the mountain. And of course these troughs were just perfect for when the lava came down and other eruptions. It just went right down. But now one more picture of that will show us. Can you blow that up a little bit, please? I had that, yeah. This is a very scary picture of Vesuvius. This is what was, I couldn't resist putting this in here, because this is a sample of one of the things, natural occurrences that terminated these towns. Sometimes it was war, sometimes pestilence, sometimes change of climate, sometimes, again, a natural effect such as this one. And that path up there is absolutely terrifying.
I can
But you
imagine.
can look down and see, and we're placed right over, you see the shore beyond there, where the town was. And little towns around it, Herculaneum and some of the others. But Pompeii was the main one, a really cosmopolitan little place. And of course down it was just spewing out from there, and all this stuff coming out. So there we have a couple of classical ones that everybody has pretty well
familiar with,
heard
right.
of. Now we'll have the next picture. This should be the one that we heard about a lot in literature. The next from it is a place that's referred to as Lyonesse, Lyonesse. And Lyonesse existed. You can see there's England and there's Brittany sticking out there. And in between, there have been chains of islands. And also, as you probably know, the English Channel has disappeared from time to time as the ocean bottoms in the North Sea and the Atlantic have risen or subsided. Well, Lyonesse was one of these islands. And again, it was a happy, in fact, too happy, sinful society oftentimes. And they were getting in trouble for some of that. The island, you see it's off there at the end of Cornwall, where it comes to an end. Now, if we look at the next picture, we see the terrain today. They're called the Scilly Isles, Scilly, the Scilly Isles. A very pretty landscape, but a landscape definitely vulnerable to what the water levels were doing.
Ravages of the sea.
Yeah. So this, again, allegedly it was that they grew too sinful and evil, and they were dunked below the water level.
The gods took care of it.
The gods took care of it. This could have happened. Maybe it didn't happen, but you can't. But there were definitely islands there, and there were there was a lot of geological activity at one point. So there's one that's quite a different nature. And that's one in literature that has quite a bit of basis, in fact. And there are all kinds of romantic literature about how you can look through the clear water and you can see the sea nymphs and nereids, playing on their lyres and all that. And thought that it might come back someday or might not. Like King Arthur's Avalon. That's another one too that's totally unknown. Now as we go on to another one here, here's the one up in the Orkney Islands. This was called Scala Brae, B-R-A-E. We used to live on a street called Bonnie Brae, a place. But you can see that it was made by stone, all stone, and up there in the Orkneys, as you know, it's rocky and stony. A lot of the Scottish, we know. Again, their life was the sea, and they were up on an eminence there. I think they had a small amount of land available for cultivating, and there was more than that. It extended along this coastline. The next picture we see shows how carefully it was built.
Yeah.
This was not just some old bunch of savages that didn't know what they were doing. This was something they really built carefully. Those flat stones they put together, and they had an excellent civilization going, which was referred to in other places. But they were allegedly done in by climate. The climate got much colder and much wetter. Mm-hmm. And already, apparently, it was fairly cold and wet up in that area. Mm-hmm. Got more like it is now. And this was discovered, this was totally unknown. Nobody suspected it was there. And a farmer nearby turned over something with his plow one day. And it looked like something made by humans. And this led to really archaeological digs. And they discovered that this thing had existed there in the distant past. It reminds you a little bit, the story of Madoc, who was a Welshman who allegedly discovered our country here, our east coast, before the Norse, the Vikings ever got there, the Norse people. And Madoc came from Wales, and right on the east coast of England. So people got interested in this. One scholar in particular, and he said, this is where he must have set sail from, because there are descriptions of it. And in those little coracle boats, they must have made you sick, bobbing around in the water. But it's described. He took a look, he thought, the ocean levels do rise and fall. And he looked back inland, and by granny, he found ruins of a town and a pier. This is another sort of magic thing that can happen, almost as though it were just conjured out of nowhere. But it had been there, for at least 1,000 years at that time. So pretty interesting. Let's try another one and see what we get. Now we've crossed the Atlantic. This picture was the best one I can find, but what this is Roanoke Island. And you remember in the 1500s, the English were colonizing or trying to colonize over here, and the Lost Colony. This is where the Lost Colony took place. It was the Roanoke Island was kind of in the lower part of the picture. You can't see it too well, but you see all the little waterways going there, and that's just what that coast is like. They came back. Some of them went home. Sir Francis Drake, of blessed fame, came by there the next year, and a lot of the people, they had their fill of it, and they went home. Because there had been some trouble with the Indians. The Europeans weren't being very nice to them. Some people went home, but the others stayed. And this was in 1597. And allegedly they were going to come back every year. Well, you remember what happened in England in 1588. The Spanish Armada showed up. And they had all that excitement going on. And it wasn't until 1590 that they got back here. And the colony was gone without a trace, almost without a trace. They looked and they looked all around the area. And that next picture shows, obviously, an artist's conception of it. But on one log that they found the word. What was the word they found? The word that gave them the clue to the local Indians.
Oh, okay, I can't read it.
Yeah, which was very, very interesting. And from that, they concluded either the Indians were helping them, or perhaps they'd gone to live with the Indians. Their food would have run out, and instead of just dying away,
Croatia.
The bodies would have been there, or bones. They might have gone to the Indians and said, look, we haven't been very friendly, but could we please start living with you so that we survive? Nobody knows what happened. So it's a real mystery. But it's where Pocahontas came from, and John Smith allegedly, did his famous thing. So that's one right here that's still a mystery. Nobody knows exactly.
Right. There are always little tales that pop up here and there.
All these little tales. Now, in the local area, you can take a tour, kind of a sound and light, and they settle upon one of the solutions, and they show you that. But you could go down there and do that now. Stay in a nearby motel.
Right.
But they had then left untouched, and they showed gardens on the island, where. Typical Elizabethan gardens and herbs. Now here's one where we stay in our country, our continent, and we go to the stories of the 7 cities of Cibola.
Oh yes.
And this is out west, cities of gold. And all around there was this rumor that somebody had actually seen these cities. And the streets were paved with gold, and everything was made of silver, and it was wonderful. It was like a paradise. Well, nobody could find it, and there was an expedition went across, and later on Coronado, who later was in this country, I guess, but he wasn't there at the time. He financed an expedition, and this map, again, these maps are not all that clear. One wishes we could look more closely, but you can see that line snaking way up to Kansas. They tried beating the bushes, and of course there were no cities. They could just look around. Clear up to Kansas, still that's a lot of territory to cover. They looked, and they found nothing. And not long after that, Hernando de Soto, the Spaniard, did a tour, looked around, and didn't find it. But one of the local people had stories of it still, and there were attempts made to find it. The closest they came, I think, was to surmising perhaps there was some mountainside and the sun getting on it made it look as though it were gold,
Right.
something like that. But they never found them. Up on Cape Breton Island, this is DeSoto's expedition. Up on Cape Breton Island off Canada, we did a show on that, in fact. There was a theory that the Chinese had been there. You know, in the 15th century, they were sailing all over the world,
Right.
these huge fleets and huge ships. And there's definitely things up there. They don't hit you in the eye. But a local man from the place got interested in it, and there were paved roads, and he did all this research in what how the Chinese built. And the ruins they found there were exactly in accord with that. And the Chinese, of course, it would have been a perfect spot because where the Gulf Stream bends is apparently right off Cape Breton Island, and they could get across the ocean, the Atlantic, down there. So that's another one that's pretty intriguing, I think. And there were tales of finding gold. It was a map back a few centuries ago, and you notice there are 7 little mounds there.
Yes.
This is somebody's theory, and what these things down below had that tied in with the story, who knows? But it's what they thought anyway, and they really believed it was there still for several hundred years. Now I think the story is pretty well squashed, but it led to some other exploration, various points. Well, one more now. And
Our
we
time is running down. So.
Yeah, we're getting close. This represents the Anasazi, and from time to time, we've heard a lot about them. They're the ones who walked off and left their buildings untouched, food on the table and so on. And why did they do that? Well, they were out, it covered an area where the 4 states come together. You know, Colorado, Utah, New Mexico,
I've
and
actually
Arizona.
been there.
Yes, I have too. Put a foot in each state, you try to put a foot in each state. But they never found out for sure what it was. But at first they assumed, well, it must have been some other tribe that came in and just wiped them out, drove them away and wiped them out. So there was never any, they were not seen again. And there were no ruins of anything. It didn't show at all. And if there'd been, there would have been at least bones, or something, if there'd been terrible battle nearby or something like that. Well, then they thought maybe it was some change in the weather, and there had been terrible droughts, several terrible droughts, which there are periodically all the time, and there's been one now, and that had not scared them away completely. They had gone up, they had started building up higher in those tower-like things you saw there, and up on the edge of bluffs. This represents some carefully built things underneath a projection of rock, and they lived under there. But no trace of them ever showed up anywhere around. No trace, as I say, was there. No bones, no nothing. At the same time, they had this relatively high civilization. They built well, and they eventually moved way up to the top there, and then finally had to leave from there to where they were up high civilization. And this wasn't covered by anything. Some of these others, like Pompeii, it's unbelievable almost that they would be covered so high that no ruins, and Troy would stick out that you couldn't find there. This picture shows another under an overhang part of it, and this shows a little more from a distance. You could see some of their towers nearby. They could do a certain amount of farming nearby. Some sustenance came from the desert, but not all. But it wasn't that. They weren't starved out. Somewhere it said there was sometimes inside these things. And they got all around by ladders. You can take tours now. Yes. Where they help you up the ladders and do all kinds of things of that nature. But the Anasazi are one of the biggest biggest mysteries, I think, in our country. So as a sort of wrap up, you see we have different kinds of these things we never knew were there at all and show up as a surprise. Things that are probably still under there, but things we did, song and story, some that proved to be true when they were investigated, others that didn't pan out, but we have things like Troy that did indeed pan out, some of these others, and of course this last one, this Anasazi, even though nothing like that happened to it, we have the remains, and we can see what kind of civilization they had, and they had artwork. They did, and of course in Pompeii, beautiful frescoes have survived whatever the disaster was that got rid of it. So there are more, I'm sure. There are a lot. You can find reference to many, many more.
Right.
The one in Arabia, I think, is one of the most intriguing things that have come along. The people, nobody has actually said, well, the city was there, but the fact that it's in the Quran, and what they're talking about is how God punishes. And then later on, of course, when the Muslims came along, the picture changed a little bit, but not all that much because it was their territory. But a really interesting part imagination and part real findings, part hard work.
I know they keep finding places down in the Central America area.
And Egypt.
That have been covered up by the forests and so on, and the sand. Thank you. I think we're all a little intrigued now about.
I'm tired after our trip through all the archaeological digs, hard work.
We'll have to look further for some of that.